gap that's going to be left at Gatwick.
Simon, thank you. The time of the Independent. Simon Marks on Donald Trump and COVID-19. Plus, Ben Kentish looks ahead to the news conference, which starts at 5. Here are the headlines now. Bill Overton.
Boris Johnson's hinted lockdown easing could begin as soon as Monday. He's to decide between now and the weekend. Germany's leaders given permission for top-flight football games there to resume, as well as relaxed social distancing. And Heathrow is setting out how it plans to use temperature screening as part of new safety measures. The weather, warm sunshine mostly, any cloud and rain to the southwest of England, and a high of 18 degrees.
LBC Travel, I'm Dave Goff. On the M1 southbound into London, there's some debris on the road, junction 4 for Edgware and junction 1 at the North Circular Road, so a lane is closed. Camden High Street northbound is closed between Mornington Crescent Station and Plunder Street because of an accident. It's slow in Edgware. The road is closed in both directions at the A5, the High Street. That's because of a fire in a building. The Strand Underpass is closed at Waterloo Bridge because of emergency repairs. Kensington Church Street is blocked both ways at Vicarage Gardens because a sinkhole has opened up. On the Underground, the Circle and Waterloo and City lines stay suspended. The advice is to only travel if your journey is essential.
This is LBC.
Right now at the Halifax, wherever we're working from, we're all working together to be there for you.
So our customers can apply for a payment holiday on mortgages, loans or credit cards.
And because we want you to stay home and stay safe,
we've created step-by-step guides to help you set up online and mobile banking,
which is safer and easier than you may think.
And for those that really need to see us in person, we're keeping as many branches open as possible.
So however you need us at the Halifax,
we're here to help.
Terms and conditions apply. For more information, go to halifax.co.uk.
Call Eddie Mayer 0345 6060 973 LBC.
When your tenants have a burst pipe, superheroes crashing through the walls can help anyone. Direct line landlord emergency added to your policy. We're on to send a in 4 hours and guarantee they'll use the doorbell. We can also assemble locksmiths, glaziers, electricians and drainage engineers. Search Direct Line Landlord Emergency. We're on it. Direct Line.
Residential properties. Optional add-on up to 1,500 per caller. Extreme weather conditions may extend response time. Underwritten by UK Insurance Limited.
At Vodafone, we know how important it is to stay connected. Now more than ever. Whether you're keeping the family entertained at home or staying close to loved ones far away. Switch to Vodafone Superfast Broadband and stay connected for only £22.95 a month. Available online today. Keeping the UK connected. Ready? Vodafone.
24-month contract, credit check, acceptance and price rise may apply. Superfast average speeds from 35 megabits per second. Vodafone.co.uk/broadband.
At Filippo Berio Olive Oil, our master blenders never stop until they find the perfect flavor, worthy of our founder signature that you will still see on every bottle. Filippo Berio, his signature, our promise. Find us at your market today.
Eddie Mayer, tweet at LBC.
Ben Kentish on tonight's Downing Street news conference in just a moment. First, as promised, to the United States, where the COVID-19 death toll is more than 70,000 and still rising every day. Yet yesterday, the Trump administration said it was preparing to wind down the White House Coronavirus Task Force. There was widespread outrage. Now the word is the task force will carry on. What a carry on. Reporting live, LBC's US correspondent Simon Marks.
Eddie, it may be the most unintentionally bizarre piece of videotape recently filmed of an American president. Donald Trump escaped Washington yesterday for Arizona, his destination a factory where they're producing vitally needed N95 masks to protect frontline healthcare workers.
This is the material that traps the particulates.
It's nothing like a set of trapped particulars. As the boss of the plant showed the president around, two things were immediately apparent. First, in a facility where everyone is required to wear a face mask, there are signs all over the place decreeing it, the president wasn't. But secondly, and even more oddly, was the choice of music blaring out over the loudspeakers as he went on his tour. Now, for the uninitiated, that is the theme to the James Bond film Live and Let Die, performed in that particular version by Guns N' Roses. Live and Let Die seemed like an odd message for the White House to embrace, given that the president is being accused by his critics of turning a blind eye to the growing threat of a massive second wave of infections here. But in an interview with ABC as soon as that factory tour ended, he indicated that yes, indeed, he does understand that reopening the country will lead to further lives being lost.
Do you believe that's the reality we're facing, that lives will be lost to reopen the country?
It's possible there will be some, because you won't be locked into an apartment or a house or whatever it is. But at the same time, we're going to practice social distancing. We're going to be washing hands. We're going to be doing a lot of the things that we've learned to do over the last period of time. And we have to get our country back.
But at what price? One study by the University of Washington now projects the president's decision to authorize states to reopen and send people back to work is likely to lead to a doubling of the current death toll. Another by the Centers for Disease Control says on America's current trajectory, the country will be seeing 3,000 deaths a day by the beginning of next month. But this is what happened when ABC gave the president an opportunity to lead the nation in grief.
We've lost more people now than we lost in the Vietnam War. What do you want to say to those families tonight?
I want to just say to the people that have lost family and have lost loved ones, and the people that have just suffered so badly and just made it, that we love you, we're with you, we're working with you, we're supplying vast amounts of money like never before. We want that money to get to the people, and we want it to get better. And we want them, you can never really come close to replacing when you've lost some. No matter how well we do next year, I think our economy is going to be raging. It's going to be so good. No matter how well, those people can never ever replace somebody they love. But we're going to have something that they're going to be very proud of.
As the president pushes forward with his reopening plan, there are bumps in the road. He announced this morning that he is not planning to disband his coronavirus task force. The mere idea voiced yesterday by Vice President Mike Pence brought fury from prominent members of the task force. They argue their mission has absolutely not yet been accomplished. And one group of President Trump's Republican critics has produced a new television ad. It turns Ronald Reagan's very upbeat It's Morning in America campaign into a very downbeat Republican critique of the Trump coronavirus response.
There's mourning in America, and under the leadership of Donald Trump, our country is weaker and sicker and poorer. And now, Americans are asking, if we have another 4 years like this, will there even be an America?
That ad was produced by the Lincoln Project, a group of old-style Republicans who don't like where President Trump has taken their party. Earlier this week, on a Fox News TV special, the president found himself literally sitting at Abraham Lincoln's feet. The program was broadcast from the Lincoln Memorial with its massive marble statue of the assassinated president.
Look, I am greeted with a hostile press, the likes of which no president has ever seen. The closest would be that gentleman right up there. They always said Lincoln, nobody got treated worse than Lincoln. I believe I am treated worse. You're there, you see those press conferences. They come at me with questions that are disgraceful, to be honest, disgraceful. Their manner of presentation and their words. And I feel that if I was kind to them, I'd be walked off the stage.
Of course, it isn't reporters who will ever walk President Trump off the stage. Only voters can do that, and they'll get their chance of opining on the president's handling of the deadliest crisis to hit the United States since the Vietnam War, Eddie, in less than 6 months' time.
Simon Marks reporting. We'll hear from Ben Kentish on tonight's news conference in just a moment. But Chris, I'd love to hear from you because we lost Sharon. You've been on a flight recently. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, I flew from Washington, D.C. to London just last Wednesday evening.
And how was it? Were you the only person on board?
Yeah, it was a British Airways flight, and there was 15 passengers. I think there was, I saw 4 crew, and it was quiet. The staff were very good. We were told at check-in to just buy whatever food we may need, because there was nothing on board. They handed us a paper bag with some food and a coffee or tea, and then we were just left to sleep for the rest of the flight to get back.
What about at the airport, at your departure and arrival?
So Washington Dulles is a pretty big airport normal, there was nobody there at all. Heathrow, again, it was just absolutely quiet, apart from the immigration people that were working there.
What would get you flying again, Chris?
Going back to see my wife.
And you'd feel safe?
I would go to... yeah, I had a mask, a warm mask. I'd feel safe. Again, the staff are reassuring as well. So, yeah, no, I'd go back tomorrow if I can do.
Chris, good to hear from you. Thank you. Jonathan says you shouldn't assume a reluctance to fly once we can fly again. We've got a house in Italy that we want to get to as soon as possible. I'm looking every day at ways to get there. Another text, I work at Gatwick for the Special Assistance Team, and for us, we're very worried about how our future will work out as everyone we move has disabilities or they're elderly and will not be travelling. Sad times for aviation. In a moment, it'll be the Downing Street News Conference. Ben Kentish, LBC's Westminster correspondent. I noticed, actually, Ben, you haven't had a question since you cut your hair live on this programme, but we'll leave that to one side. More important things to talk about, including the work you've been doing today on care homes.
Eddie, I've been speaking this morning to some of the members of the government SAGE committee, people advising the government on the science, and the message was quite clear, and it is one of worry about the situation in care homes. In short, the experts believe the epidemic in the community is under control. We've heard a lot about that R number, the rate of transmission. They think in the community it is as low as 0.5. That means for every one person that gets it, fewer than one are infected. So that means the epidemic comes down. In care homes, it's a very, very different story. In fact, one person said to me, when I asked him to predict what proportion of new cases are in care homes and hospitals, i.e. not in the community, but in those care settings, he thought it could be as high as 2/3 of all the current cases we're seeing every day in those settings. Best estimate, about 1/3, but it could be as high as 2/3. And even 1/3 of it, of course, is hugely disproportionate to the number of people in those care homes. So this is clearly where the crisis is. The people I spoke to were far from convinced, I'm afraid, that it is under control. The number of cases seems to be continuing to going up, and the worry is that as health workers and social workers pick up the virus in those settings, there's a risk of it picking up again in the community from them. So it's very, very clear now. The scientists are giving the same message, which is the key to stopping this virus across the country is stopping it in care homes. And that means, of course, much more work on PPE, but also much more work to segregate the patients that might have this virus from those who currently don't. And the worrying message that I heard from the experts was they are concerned that still, Eddie, that's not what's happening.
Ben, thank you so much. Ben Kentish, our Westminster correspondent. Stand by for the Downing Street News briefing. It's imminent. Here's the Steve Allen soundbite of the night.
I'm not keen on trout.
This is LBC. I'm Eddie Mayer. The coronavirus headlines at 5 o'clock. Another testing target from Boris Johnson.
But the ambition clearly is to get up to 200,000 a day by the end of this month, and then to go even higher.
Downing Street clarified that target is for capacity, not the number of tests. Heathrow Airport is testing temperature checks for travellers.
We are testing right now a large-scale screening system which would use temperature checks, which would act as a first filter.
Matthew Thompson reports before 6 on the health dangers for children caused by the lockdown.
We've already heard from general practices that fewer parents are attending to their child's vaccination appointment.
Coming up, Downing Street's news conference, Robert Jenrick, the Secretary of State for Housing, Local Government and Communities. You'll hear it live and in full here on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, I'm Bill Overton. The coronavirus lockdown situation for the UK could start to change on Monday. Boris Johnson says he'll be briefed on the latest data before making a speech on Sunday night. He returned to Prime Minister's questions earlier, his first since hospital treatment for the infection. He was challenged by the Labour leader Keir Starmer on UK deaths and the government's claim to be successfully handling the outbreak.
That's now the highest number in Europe. It's the second highest in the world. That's not success or apparent success. So can the Prime Minister tell us how on earth did it come to this?
Of course, there will be a time to look at what decisions we took and whether we could have taken different decisions. What the people of this...
We'll leave the news there and take you to Downing Street. Robert Jenrick.
Welcome to the coronavirus press conference from Downing Street. I'm joined this afternoon by Professor Yvonne Doyle, the Medical Director of Public Health England, and Dr. Nikki Kanani, the Deputy Medical Director for NHS England, who has a particular focus on primary care. Today's data shows that 1,448,010 tests for coronavirus have now been carried out across Great Britain, including 69,463 tests carried out yesterday. 201,101 people have tested positive. That's an increase of 6,111 cases since yesterday. 13,615 people are currently in hospital with coronavirus in Great Britain, down from 13,922 yesterday. And sadly, of those hospitalised with the virus, 30,076 have now died. That's an increase of 649 fatalities since yesterday. Behind those numbers are heartbreaking losses for the loved ones of all those who've died. And once again, our thoughts and our prayers are with their friends and their families. Professor Doyle will provide an update on the latest data on coronavirus. But first, as Communities Secretary, I'd like to take this opportunity to give an update on the work being done locally during the pandemic to keep people safe, to provide support for people's jobs and their businesses, and to prepare for the reopening and the recovery of our local economies. That's why it's appropriate that this afternoon we're joined by regional journalists who are doing so much to keep people informed about how the national effort is being coordinated in our own communities. A free country needs a free press, and the national, the regional and the local newspapers of our country are under significant financial pressure. I'd like to echo the words of the Culture Secretary recently in encouraging everyone who can to buy a newspaper. As I said before, the battle against coronavirus will be won in every city, in every town and every village across the country. This is truly a national effort, and it's a national effort taking place at a local level. My department, the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, has played a vital role in bringing people together to tackle the virus. We've provided local authorities with over £3.2 billion during this pandemic so that they can continue to support the communities that need it through this most challenging time and respond to the immediate pressures they are facing due to coronavirus, whilst also protecting and preserving vital public services. At the start of March, I established a task force to support local resilience forums, known as LRFs, standing them up at a local level across the country to prepare each and every community for a range of different scenarios. There are 38 LRFs in England, which are made up of emergency services, a range of government agencies, health bodies and local authorities. They're headed by some of the most senior and experienced local leaders of the emergency services, of councils, the NHS and others who together are leading their communities through the crisis with the full support of central government. Recognising the unprecedented challenge that we faced, I took the decision to embed within them some of the finest military planners in the world from our armed forces, and I'm very grateful for their hard work in recent weeks. This combined expertise and leadership is ensuring a comprehensive, coordinated and consistent response across the country. Responding to the urgent need for personal protective equipment to reach the front line of the care sector, we've mobilised LRFs to help distribute PPE, and thus far they've delivered over 67 million items in England alone since early April. Together with local councils, they're also assisting us in supporting some of the most vulnerable individuals in their communities. And to date, they've helped us to ensure that 1 million boxes of food and essential supplies have now been delivered to those people identified by the NHS as extremely clinically vulnerable to coronavirus, the shielded. With more than 290,000 boxes being distributed every week, this has been a huge team effort, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone involved for the role that they've played and will play in the weeks ahead. We're also working very closely with mayors to make sure that we have a coordinated approach to tackling coronavirus at a local level. The government has been determined to ensure that the vital work of keeping people safe in their homes also continues. So with the support of the mayors of London, of the Liverpool City region, of Greater Manchester, of Sheffield, of the West Midlands, and others, we were able to announce the Building Safety Pledge. These mayors have come together because they have a number of the high-rise buildings with highly flammable cladding in their respective regions. And the pledge that we agreed sends a very clear message that vital building safety work must continue despite the coronavirus pandemic. And we've been joined by 25 local authorities, including 18 in London, who've also given their fulsome support. As work on many of these critical sites was paused early on, it's now slowly starting to reassume as a result of this initiative. And I would urge any building owner or contractor to do so as soon as practical, where it's safe to begin work once
I
again.
have the voice of Mario. Voice of Haunting. It's the voice of Mario. Mario. Oh my God.
Unleash the potential of this country. The Prime Minister will set out on Sunday our approach to the second phase of this pandemic.
Tragic.
As we look ahead to supporting
What are we doing with the voice?
businesses
23 years.
reopen,
Are you
my
married?
department
No,
will
I'm
lead the way
just trying to
on
rescue
how
the
our
princess so
local
I can finally
economies
marry her
can
once and
adapt,
for all. So when you're
evolve,
dating,
recover,
at some point
and
the
grow.
voice is a draw,
I will
and then
continue
you
to
hit a
support
point where the voice is
and
like, you
local
gotta
government
knock it
leaders
off
who
with the
will play a
voice. I say,
critical
right?
role
Says you
in
live.
this work. Every local economy now needs a plan to restart and recover. We will be informing these plans with our own detailed work in areas such as how workplaces, from factories to construction sites to offices, can be adapted, how outdoor spaces, leisure and businesses, from parks to high streets to markets, can be managed, and how public transport networks, from the tube to trams to buses, can operate. In each case, guided by scientific and medical advice, we want to ensure appropriate and safe social distancing, providing the public with the confidence to return to work and to return to public spaces and public transport, knowing that it's always safe to do so. We're considering how we can create more room in town centres for pedestrians.
Bully me all you like. I can handle it. I have very thick skin.
And we'll work with towns.
Sometimes I look at you and you're just doing this with your mouth.
Have been hardest
I don't know what that is. Your cheeks look like an old Western saddle. No problem. I can handle it. You can all pile on after my smoke break. You know, when I was on Outward Bound, I was bullied myself down. Nobody cares about your dumb wilderness stories.
It's clear to everyone that the pandemic is putting huge pressure.
But how can I be a bully? I'm a sweet guy. You're a bitch.
That lie ahead in our own country. But we cannot or will not let this pandemic halt our work to improve connectivity, to provide vital social and cultural
Well, if you become the new creed, I'll
and to
divorce
boost
you.
economic growth across the regions. That is how we'll begin to rebuild and
Bully
to
me all
recover
you like.
from this national emergency. we're working to ensure the right support is available to local businesses. And last week, high street businesses began to receive the £22 billion package designed to mitigate some of the effects of coronavirus, with grants of up to £25,000 being paid into bank accounts of those businesses. And of course, our 100 towns benefiting from the £3.6 billion Towns Fund will continue to receive our support, and we'll be working at pace with them in the months ahead. Local authorities have now paid out
Joel,
over
you're
£8.6
drunk.
billion
Okay, you're
in
drunk. Give me your
grants
keys.
to around
And I'm drunk, so I give
700,000
you my keys.
businesses.
Okay, now
As
we're
local
both
government
good.
secretary, I'd
Drive
like to
home.
congratulate those councils who've worked extremely hard, sometimes around
Been
the clock,
drinking tonight,
to
sir?
get
No,
grants out
Santa
to the
Claus for
businesses
dinner.
that desperately need them. I'd
Okay,
like
I'm
to
gonna need you to
congratulate
step out of the
Chichester,
car
Ely
and
and
walk in
Hyndburn
straight line,
councils,
please.
who are the three highest performing
All right, you
councils
be safe,
so
sir.
far
There's a lot
in
of
England.
crazies out here tonight.
Businesses are also receiving
Okay,
discounts
Joel.
of almost £10 billion
Toast to
on
the
their
ones that we
rent
lost
in
on the
response
way,
to
'cause the drinks
COVID-19,
bring back
with the
all the
hardest
memories.
hit by
And the
the
memories.
pandemic, such as shops, cafes and pubs, paying no business rates whatsoever this financial year. Together with existing reliefs, this means that 1.1 million ratepayers are no longer paying business rates this year. This week, the Chancellor and I announced an additional 5% uplift, up to £617 million, available to local councils to fund small businesses that rent space in shared offices, industrial units and innovation centres, as well as market traders, B&Bs that pay council tax rather than business rates, and also to support small charities. And local councils will now have more flexibility to make pragmatic decisions to keep those businesses going so they can bounce back.
You're still listening to Robert Jenrick.
Moving forward, our mission is to ensure everything we can is done to help people to get back to work safely, to reunite friends and family, and to reintroduce the things that make life worth living in a safe way as soon as it's safe to do so. Finally, on Friday, we will be celebrating as a country the 75th anniversary of VII Day. My department, like others, had been helping to plan some of the public celebrations, but we know that, sadly, we'll now need to mark this important occasion from home instead. Cabinet colleagues have been speaking with veterans organised by the Royal British Legion. I had the pleasure earlier this week of speaking to Leslie, a 98-year-old World War II veteran, on the phone. Leslie was full of warmth and wisdom, telling me how he spent VE Day in Siena, having fought his way through North Africa and Italy, and how he would be spending Friday more sedately celebrating at home. He said to me that as we rebuilt and we recovered then, he's certain that we'll do so again this year. I'll now hand over to Dr. Kanani in the first instance, and then to Professor Doyle. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary of State. And I wanted to just reflect on your point about community and thank communities for following government advice at an incredibly difficult time. I'm a GP, and before I was a GP, I grew up in a community pharmacy, and my colleagues have been facing probably the most challenging time they've ever had to. And right across the NHS, people are working under significant stress and strain, and our communities have helped to look after them and to look out for them through staying at home and following government advice and becoming volunteer responders and looking out for their own communities. So I want to thank you for that. It's really challenging, isn't it? I have a family member who's shielding, I'm homeschooling children, and it feels difficult, and we all want reassurance, and we miss the familiarity of the things that we always used to do. But I wanted to reassure people who are listening and watching today that your primary care services are still there for you. I want to pay tribute to our GP practices and our general practice teams, our dentists, our optometrists, the unsung heroes, the community pharmacists on the high street who've continued to work day after day and make sure that they're there for you. And this bank holiday, they'll be open as well. And it might feel a little bit different. You might have more telephone calls or online consultations, you might see somebody dressed in PPE, as I was yesterday in my surgery. But you must know that your NHS is still here for you, so please come and contact us if you need advice or support over the coming weeks and months. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. I think we all want to reiterate your comments and the thanks to GPs and everybody working in primary care across the country. I'll turn over to Yvonne, who's going to present today's slides.
Thank you, Secretary of State. So just to remind us all of the 5 tests for adjusting the lockdown here, we can see that they relate to capacity and to mortality, to deaths, and also that we are actually controlling the epidemic itself and the transmission of the epidemic. So looking at the first graph here, please, the next slide, we can see again that this is about transport. It's a regular slide. It shows that overall transport use is down a good bit, by 50%, but less so for motor vehicles, and that has been slowly increasing over recent weeks. And this is up to the 4th of May, and it's for the UK. Could I have the next slide, please? The important message in all that, of course, is that we must still respect that this virus does transmit, and to stay at home and not to interact too much, because people are still very vulnerable to getting this virus. Now we can see here the daily tests, and these have increased over time. This is up to the 6th of May. But I will move on really to the next slide, which is of interest, which is the new cases. And here we have more new cases, and this may be a matter of concern, but of course it's also a matter of testing more, so that we are doing more testing, and therefore we will find more cases, and this is what we want to do. We want to find the positive cases so that we can break transmission. So on to the next one, please, and this is about people in hospital. I know of great interest to you listening, and the news here is generally very good. You can see where London had its early epidemic, and it has declined. The cases in hospital have declined, as more slowly perhaps have other regions. And we see here where the Northwest has now has more cases in the hospital than London, but overall we have about 13,000 cases, which is a decrease, and it's good news. And then if we can just look at the most critically ill patients, and this is about critical care beds use throughout the UK, and this is again good news. It's for the 4 countries of the UK, and we can see here where we actually have less than a third of critical care beds being occupied by people with the coronavirus. So good news there, it is declining. And then we look at the recorded deaths. Less good news here in terms of these are very tragic. It is very, very sad, but the trend is good, because it is slowly coming down. And this is a 7-day rolling average for the UK. And as has been said, we have 649 yesterday, and that was a decline, a slow decline. And then finally 2 slides about the international deaths. So the first one is just the crude numbers. And this, of course, depends on the size of the country.
Hey, everybody. Today we're going to be showing you how to dip for clams.
Deaths in the United States, but of course a big country, and we can see the UK and the European countries there further down. But if we look at the last slide, which is about the rates per million population, then we have taken account of the size of the country, and we can see a difference pattern where the UK and European countries are more closely together. And this, I want to say that this really is presented just to show you different ways of looking at death. There are many different ways of looking at death. It is far too early to say how this will eventually...
And it should be said on this graph, the UK does appear to be ahead of all the other countries.
We need to give this some time. Most of those who are used to looking at these things would say probably a year. But we thought we would be interested to see. So thank you, Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. And before we turn to questions from the regional press, we have 2 from members of the public, and the first one is from Edward in Hereford.
An excess in critical care beds across the NHS and Nightingale hospitals. My question is, why has the UK suffered a greater number of deaths when compared to countries such as Italy, who had their healthcare systems completely overrun by COVID-19.
Well, thank you, Edward, for that question. Why has the UK suffered a higher number of deaths compared to Italy, for example, whose healthcare system was overrun by COVID-19? Well, I think as the Prime Minister has said on a number of occasions now, it is difficult to make international comparisons.
Well, you've shown us two graphs
today. There will be a time for that, and we have already established the way in which we will measure that in due course, which is a measure of excess deaths. But that is a hard calculation to do with accuracy today. Of course, we want to learn whatever lessons we can do as we're still responding to the virus. But I think the time for accurate comparisons will come in the future. It is more positive, of course, that when we saw those very disturbing scenes earlier in the year in Italy of their very good health service being overwhelmed, and were concerned about the potential impact upon the NHS, that we haven't seen those scenes in the UK. We have had sufficient ICU capacity. We have had sufficient ventilator capacity. And of course, we've been able to build capacity, for example, with the Nightingale hospitals, some of which have not been used at all so far during the course of the virus. I don't know if, Yvonne, you want to add more about the international perspective.
Thank you, Secretary of State. So credit to the NHS for having not been overwhelmed. But in international comparisons, as I have mentioned, countries, Edward, measure in very different ways. They measured this virus number of deaths in different ways. And that is absolutely fine so long as that is consistent in each country. It makes international comparisons very difficult, though, because we are not comparing like with like. And it's worth continuing to stress this because over time, probably the right measures have been outlined by a number of our experts, including our Chief Medical Officer, which would be excess mortality, excess deaths overall in a period of time. And then we will know truly how we have been impacted, but also this is a comparable measure internationally. So we would then be able to understand how we have been impacted internationally as well.
Thank you very much. Well, our second question is from Emma from Swansea. And Emma's question is, religion is a huge part of life for many in the UK. Seeing sport prioritised in discussions over other parts of life has been hard to see. How will the government protect the rights of religious communities to practice their faith in community as the lockdown is eased? Well, I think that's a very important question. Obviously, in any part of our lives, the government has been driven by a desire to protect life and has taken expert medical and scientific opinion. But we're very aware that this has been a difficult period for different faith groups. You've seen, for example, the Jewish community having to hold their Seders at Passover by Zoom and without having their friends and family around them. You then saw the same at Easter, where churches were not able to come together, and the Archbishop of Canterbury and Cardinal Nichols and others held their sermons and services over the internet, as in churches across the country. And then at the moment, through Ramadan, friends and family are not able to come together to break fast in the way that they traditionally would. And we know this is very tough, and none of us would want these restrictions to continue a day longer than they need to. But it is right that we stick to the advice, the medical advice at this time, however much it goes against our traditions and our religious beliefs, in order to protect others as well as ourselves. We are in conversation with faith leaders across the country to consider how, when the time is right, they will be able to recommence services in churches and mosques and synagogues across the country. But that moment is not now. We've also been working with them on how we can ensure that funerals and other important events in people's lives are conducted in an appropriate way. And my department has issued guidance to enable people to hold funerals in public spaces, for example, like crematoriums, with close members of their family around them, because none of us want to see scenes, which we did see, unfortunately, in a small number of occasions early on in the virus, of funerals being conducted with few, if anyone, present. That wasn't right. We've issued guidance now, so that shouldn't happen again, and we're working with faith leaders to see how, where appropriate, those funerals could be conducted in churches or other settings like that as well.
I don't know if Yvonne or Nikki, you want to add anything to that from your perspective?
I think, as you said, it's important that we work with our communities. We also know that we've seen a difference in how different communities have had COVID-19 infections as well. So there's a lot that we can do to understand how our communities are responding and making sure that communities have what they need during the coming weeks and months.
And Secretary of State, could I just cite my thanks to the various religious leaders that have worked with Public Health England and with the NHS to handle very sensitive issues in a very helpful, proactive way, understanding how very difficult this is for the communities in terms of handling the host, in terms of group gatherings, and then, sadly, in terms of funerals and respectful handling of bodies. And we have worked very constructively, and for that I am very grateful.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, thank you, Emma, for that question. And our first question from members of the press comes from Patrick Burns from BBC West Midlands. Good afternoon, Patrick.
Good afternoon, Secretary of State. And I'm sure you don't need me to remind you that at the beginning of all this, the Prime Minister pledged to local authority leaders that they would have a key role, the lead role, in bringing their local communities and vulnerable people through all this. Resources will follow, he said. Well, 6 weeks on, it's beginning to look as though even the extra help that you've been talking about just now may not actually be enough. If you think of Birmingham City Council alone, the extra costs they've incurred already as a result of this heading north of £260 million and counting. And their leader, Ian Ward, says that really crucial services like adult social care and children's services may be compromised in the near future if, as he puts it, the government doesn't match its words with action.
Well, thank you. Well, let me be very clear to local council leaders across the country, including in the West Midlands. We will stand behind them, ensure that they have the resources that they need to carry out the absolutely critical functions that they're playing in our national response to coronavirus. That was the promise that I made to local council leaders, as did the Prime Minister early in the life of the emergency. We've already provided £3.2 billion of additional resources to councils in just the last 2 months. We've provided almost £4 billion of cash flow to councils, precisely so that they shouldn't have to face the difficult choices that you've just described between responding to the virus in their own communities and continuing to do very important public service functions like refuse collection, for example, or looking after vulnerable children in their communities. In the West Midlands, local councils will receive £347 million to deal with the pressures of coronavirus. And that comes on top of a very generous settlement at the beginning of the financial year, which also increased their core spending power by over £300 million. If further resources are required to meet the COVID-related costs that we've asked councils to bear, then obviously we'll take that into consideration in the future. And I've been working very closely with local council leaders and the Mayor in the West Midlands, Andy Street, who's been doing a fantastic job at leading the community forward through a very difficult time. I don't know if there's anything further you'd like to ask, Patrick, or move on to the next question.
I'd just like to really sort of suggest that the key issue here, Secretary of State, is making sure that the extra support gets through to all the authorities who need it. If you take Shropshire as an example, they say the money that they've received doesn't yet cover all the extra costs that they have incurred. And within that area, if you talk to Shrewsbury Town Council, they've been saying on BBC Radio Shropshire that not enough of the money is actually filtering down to the lower tier authorities like them, who, as they point out, are actually closest to the very communities who most need the help.
Well, there's two points there. Firstly, in terms of ensuring that councils get the resources they need, we're absolutely committed to doing that. Councils are receiving more money so far than they have reported to us as needing to meet the COVID-related costs that they're bearing. They are also, like other organisations across the country, seeing significant reductions in their income because we're not parking in their car parks and using their leisure centres and so on. And that's a particular challenge that we're also focused on, but that's a separate issue. In the latest £1.6 billion that we provided to councils, we made sure that a significant amount of it did flow to lower tier councils, like district councils, for example. And so your average district council in England will now receive, if they haven't done so already in the coming days, £1 million or more of additional grant to help them with COVID-related expenditure and also to stabilise their finances. And we've asked big parish councils, like the ones you've referred to in Shropshire, like Shrewsbury or Bridgnorth or Ludlow, to speak with their principal councils who will be receiving that £1 million or more of funding and ensure that it flows down to them if they're also under financial pressure at the moment. And I hope that that will help. Obviously, my department and I are here to speak with those councils and ensure they get through this with us together. Thank you, Patrick. I'll come to the second question now, which is from James Vincent from BBC Yorkshire. Good afternoon, James.
Good afternoon, thank you very much. On BBC Look North tonight, we're going to be speaking to Sarah, who's a 6-year-old from Tadcaster who needs a kidney transplant. Her operation was cancelled when the coronavirus crisis hit. What works the government and the NHS doing to make sure that those people that need vital care, vital operations away from coronavirus are going to get that as soon as possible? And what's the NHS and the government doing to make sure that any backlog is worked through in the best possible way?
Thank you, James. And that's a very important question, which I'm sure is on the mind of many people across the country. Can I perhaps come to Nikki in the first instance?
Absolutely. Thank you for your question. And it's something that we're thinking about very actively, as you can imagine. I think it was right that over the last few weeks and months, the NHS made a concerted effort to focus on services that were either urgent for an individual or were related to the COVID response. And we absolutely had to do that. So we had to step away from other procedures and routine reviews that we might have otherwise done. But now, and as Sir Simon Stevens wrote last week, we've asked the whole system to think about...
Steve Oyster there, the name I recognise, but I haven't seen you around for ages. Ugh, so I was just having a little break.
Have revolutionised the way that they've worked, whether that's by using digital technology or developing new ways of caring for
pardon me.
But in the case of the child that you mentioned, that child will be prioritised and that operation will be scheduled so that we can get people back on track and that the really important things happen as soon as possible.
Very good, thank you. Do you have a follow-up question, James?
Follow-up on council finances. Our councils in Yorkshire are saying that there's a £200 million gap between what you're providing and what they think they'll be spending on the coronavirus crisis. On Monday, you told MPs that some of those calculations from councils were highly speculative. Are you suggesting that they're perhaps getting their sums wrong?
No, not at all. We've provided, as I said, £3.2 billion to councils already, plus £4 billion of cash flow. So it's a lot of money to be provided in just a 2-month period to councils, and we think that is sufficient to meet the immediate demands of the crisis. However, as we understand better the length at which lockdown measures may have to be in place and the economic disruption that flows as a result of the crisis, which is difficult to judge today, we will work with councils to ensure that they have the funding that is required so they can navigate their way through this difficult period. So my message to councils is continue to do the important work that you're doing, whether that's on adult social care, getting our sleepers off the street, supporting the vulnerable, getting those business grants out to the community, and we'll make sure that you have the funding that's required, and we'll work with you to better understand in the weeks and months ahead the true impact upon your finances of the disruption economically that we're suffering and of their response to coronavirus. It's too early to tell in some cases what those costs will be, but we will learn in the weeks and months to come, and we'll work very closely with councils, including throughout Yorkshire. Thank you. The next question is from Tom Sheldrick, who is from ITV Tyne Tees. Tom.
Thank you, good afternoon. Last week, our analysis revealed that the North East has had a higher number of confirmed coronavirus cases per head than any other part of England, and the gap is continuing to widen. The virus is affecting some of the most deprived areas in our region particularly badly. The regional chair of the British Medical Association, Dr. George Ray, has called for the government to act on sensible policies, which he describes as a point of national shame. So what are you doing now to try to reduce the number of people in the North East being infected with coronavirus health and at greater risk from viruses like this?
Thank you, Tom. Well, I'll ask Yvonne to speak in a moment to the question. But on the broader issue of emerging data suggesting a socio-economic impact upon deaths with the virus, obviously that's extremely concerning to us. We want to understand all of the contributing factors that make people more vulnerable to the virus, including those, and including, for example, some of the ethnic groups like BAME communities and their exposure to the virus. We're working with Public Health England on some of those issues, like, for example, the BAME issue. The Chief Medical Officer has commissioned specific research so we can better understand the issue and respond to it in due course. But if you want to say more, in particular about the North East and its position in the passage of the virus.
Thank you, Secretary of State. So, Tom, there are over 8,000 confirmed positive cases of coronavirus in the North East at the moment. And as you say, some areas of great need, which, of course, we would have been involved with both from our national through to local services in the public health system before this epidemic. What we really need to know now first is to understand what additional or excess impact this virus has had on those communities and how distributed that might be. So as well as doing work on generally on disadvantage in particular groups in the population, we would like to look at the geographies that have been most impacted by that, and that work is underway, and we will be able to describe that as we go forward over the coming weeks and months. But we also, I would want to reassure you that, you know, the business of as usual work needs to continue in working locally to promote the health, the good health of people, and to ensure that we are protecting their health from issues other than COVID. Because one of the great dangers here is that people forget that actually there are other harms in the population, some of which may be greater than the virus itself. So our local teams working with local councils and particularly local public health departments, directors of public health, are very active. We're in touch every week and sometimes several times a week to understand the dynamics of what is going on and to make sure that the good business as usual, as far as it can, continue. And just one concern is, of course, that where services have had to stop, for instance, immunisation or smoking cessation, that we actually move as soon as we can, when it's safe, to re-establish the preventive services as well.
Thank you. Tom, do you have a quick follow-up to that question, or are you content?
Yes, please. If I can ask you, Secretary of State, are you considering lifting lockdown restrictions later in regions like the North East, where the number of coronavirus cases continues to grow while it's perhaps stabilising elsewhere?
Well, the Prime Minister will set out on Sunday our approach to the next phase of the virus, so I don't think that I can helpfully presage those remarks. Our strong preference, though, is that the whole country moves as one. But if, as we build up our infrastructure for testing and tracking and tracing, in time it's required for us to make interventions in smaller sort of micro communities where you're seeing the virus take hold again, then that will be something that we consider, as other countries around the world have done when they've implemented effective track and trace systems. But that's quite different to making major changes to lockdown measures in one part of the country versus another. And our strong preference, as it was at the beginning of the lockdown measures, for the whole country to move as one. I'll go now to the next question, which is from Zena Hawley from the Derby Telegraph.
Thank you, Mr. Jenrick. I wanted to say that Derby's a great city with a strong industrial base, but the announcement of 8,000 potential job losses at Rolls-Royce could have extreme consequences, obviously, for the company, but also for the supply chain of the companies that obviously supply it. What can the government do to help Rolls-Royce, a company that's always been there for Britain through times of extreme hardship, etc.? And also, could I ask more widely, what role does the government expect cities like Derby to play as we emerge from the current crisis?
Well, thank you very much, and I share your concern for the news of potential job losses at Rolls-Royce. I know how important Rolls-Royce is to Derby, Midlands and to the whole country. It's one of our most important advanced manufacturing business, one with a very rich history, and I'm certain a business that will have a great future as well. It's renowned all over the world. Aviation is an important sector to the economy, but it is a sector facing almost unprecedented issues as a result of coronavirus. We want to support the aviation sector in any way that we can do. The Chancellor has already announced an unprecedented set of measures to support businesses large and small. I know that Rolls-Royce is a business that has already taken advantage, for example, of the job retention scheme, furloughing some of its employees from April. We're going to work closely with the sector, and we've said before that we're willing to consider situations where we would support individual firms, but obviously only when they've worked through the existing government schemes and other ways in which they might be able to raise finance commercially or through existing shareholders. If there's more we can do for Rolls-Royce, we want to do so. I know that the Business Secretary and the Chancellor are already in contact with Rolls-Royce and will do so again in the future. As regards Derby, more generally, well, it's one of our great cities, a city I know well, representing Nottinghamshire constituency nearby. I'm certain it has a strong future. I will be working closely with local leaders to ensure that their plans for rebuilding and recovering the local economy work in step with those that we're producing nationally. And the voice of the business community in Derby is heard in the decisions that we're making here in Whitehall. And that's the same for cities, for local government leaders and for mayors across the country. Thank you very much. Was there a further question you'd like to add, or are you content
If I
with
could, please. I want to ask
Absolutely.
about education, because that is something that's dear to my heart as the education correspondent at the Derby Telegraph. Schools and their plans for reopening. I've had discussions with local unions, I've had discussions with local experts in the education field, and there is a strong feeling that it's going to be very, very difficult to achieve very easily. And I'm wondering whether or not there is going to be any move towards having PPE in schools at all. So far, teachers have been going into school, they've been there for key workers' children, they've carried on, and I know there's been quite a bit of illness among teachers. But I mean, what can we do to protect our teachers and actually give confidence to parents, staff and pupils that could be going back to school any time?
Thank you. Well, I know that there will be concern from teachers, as indeed from parents, and the education sector will working closely with the trade unions and other representatives from education to plan a phased reopening of schools when the time is right. We have taken scientific advice with respect to the level of PPE that might be required in schools, and I'll let Yvonne speak to that perhaps in a moment, who's better placed than I will. But as I understand it, the advice is that staff in non-residential education settings don't require PPE, but we will obviously keep that under close review. And we've also published guidance on social distancing within schools, which is already being applied in the schools that are open, obviously only with a small percentage of students currently in them, but which will inform the plans that are emerging for the reopening of schools when the time's right. And if Yvonne, there's anything you'd like to add?
So Sina, yes. Getting the confidence of parents and teachers will be critical, actually, as to whether the children would come back to school, even if it was agreed that they should. And it's what can be done there is part of a package. It's very important that you're probably thinking about PPE like face masks. Now, face masks, there's been a lot of debate about that. They are probably helpful to protect others from yourself when you're not well, particularly if you're exuding droplets, coughing and sneezing and so on, but they have to be worn properly. And people always forget that face masks are not actually what is going to contain the virus wholly. It is a whole package of issues like good hygiene, particularly hand hygiene, how you interact your hand with your face and so on. And equally, how the school environment is kept clean, disinfected, how the children are spaced. And this will all take quite a lot of organisation. So this is why no one is rushing to do this prematurely. And we have looked at what other countries are doing on this, so that we're learning about how countries have gained the confidence of parents and teachers. Teachers are key workers, and if they're unwell, they can have testing, and they should do that, and indeed should not work if they're unwell. So there is good guidance. We in Public Health England and others are working with the Department for Education intensely on this, and with indeed the trades unions and others in those conversations, so that we try to get this right.
Thank you. Very helpful. Well, I'll come to the next question now, which is from Keith Rossiter. And Keith is from Cornwall Live and the Western Morning News. Good afternoon, Keith.
Good afternoon, Secretary of State. Well, thanks for encouraging your viewers to go out and buy a copy of the newspaper. Cornwall relies heavily on tourism and the hospitality industry, and our hoteliers, publicans and resorts fear that they could lose a whole year if they don't reopen by July. If that happens, what will the government do to support them?
Thank you. Well, I think we all understand that many businesses across the country are suffering, but those in hospitality are particularly poorly equipped to cope with what's happening at the moment. And an economy such as the Southwest, which is so heavily dependent on tourism, will be very significantly impacted. The package of measures that the Chancellor has already brought forward are helping businesses in Cornwall. I think Southwest councils will receive over £1.5 billion of business support, and there's 126,000 businesses within the Southwest who are eligible for those grants. I know that Cornwall Council is one of the best in the country for getting those grants out to the businesses who really need them. They've already paid out £202 million worth of grants to 17,789 firms, which is one of the highest in England. And I pay tribute to the officers at Cornwall Council for doing that. The Prime Minister has said today that if further interventions are required to support a sector like tourism, hospitality, we will obviously consider that and bring forward appropriate measures when they're needed. We know that it's going to be very difficult for them in the months to come, and we want to try to guide their path through this period so that they, like the rest of the economy, can bounce back when we're able to reopen in due course. Keith, I don't know if you have a second question.
Yes, I do, thank you. Sir Patrick Vallance earlier in the week suggested that, or hinted that some regions could come out of lockdown sooner. And we saw from one of the slides earlier that the Southwest has the lowest number of cases. If we were released sooner, what support would there be for Devon and Cornwall Police, who are already very overstretched, to prevent a large-scale invasion of holiday makers?
Well, I'll perhaps turn to Yvonne to speak about the regional disparities in the path of the virus and how we might respond to that, including through tracking and tracing. In terms of local councils and the emergency services and ensuring that they have the support that's required, as I said earlier, we're providing additional funding to forces, and the Home Secretary is speaking with national police chiefs to ensure that they have the right guidance and consistent messaging that they can use to enforce the lockdown rules where that's required. And as we've seen so far, the vast majority of members of the public have chosen to do so and to adhere to the messaging, and most police forces have been able to support the lockdown measures through consent, which is the way we want to do things in this country. But in the isolated number of cases where that's not been possible, obviously they've also had tools at their disposal to fine and to enforce the lockdown. Yvonne.
So thank you to the Secretary of State. So Keith, there are over 14,000 confirmed cases in Cornwall, and saying that it's a big county, so actually the epidemic seems to have had somewhat less impact in the southwest, and we need to be absolutely sure that it stays that way. So we're watching it very carefully, and hopefully it will. Now, if and when restrictions ease on the way people are living lives at the moment, It will be very important that we don't begin to see the re-emergence of transmission. And what Secretary of State has been describing is this major programme that we are actually trialling at the moment through the use of an app in the Isle of Wight, but will be much broader than that. It will be really a population-based programme to ensure that people who are unwell, particularly with the symptoms of this virus, are isolated pretty quickly and tested quickly, and that their contacts, particularly their immediate contacts, the ones that matter, are also informed and can take action. And that will absolutely be key to gradually releasing life back to a changed normal. And that programme is being launched this month, and it's very important that we're confident that that works well.
Thank you, and thank you, Keith, for your questions. If I may now go to the last question, which is from Chris Young. And Chris is the local democracy reporter based at the Telegraph and Argus in Bradford. Good afternoon, Chris.
Good afternoon. The past few weeks, there's been many student nurses, paramedics, midwives called to the front line of the NHS to help with the current pandemic, and many of them in Bradford. Now, due to changes made a couple of years ago by the government, the current cohort of final year student nurses are having to pay their fees without the support of bursaries, and effectively they're having to risk their lives and use loans to pay to do that. Due to the concern that these student nurses who are stepping up to help the NHS are having to get into debt and risk their lives, and then facing this mountain of debt afterwards. Would you support any campaign by the Telegraph and Argus and other local news organisations to have this scrapped, the tuition fee scrapped, once this is all over?
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you for all the work that the Telegraph and Argus does in Bradford, supporting the NHS, including those healthcare professionals who've chosen to come back to work in the service and who have done a fantastic job already, and many are still returning to work in the NHS and in social care. We're very grateful for nursing and midwifery students who have chosen to go onto the front line and help in our hospitals and care homes at this time. Those nurses and midwives who have opted in will receive the salary and the pension that is appropriate to their level. And I'm also told that the student loan company have confirmed that student loans will continue regardless of whether the individual is learning or whether, as in this case, they've chosen to opt in and help us in the NHS. But we're all just massively grateful for those people, for everything that they're doing on the front line. I don't know if, Nikki, you want to say anything more about the returners and
yes,
those people who've been
absolutely.
volunteering?
Thank you, Secretary of State. I'll just echo your thanks. First of all, we've seen an incredible number of not just our students coming to work at a really challenging time across all the professions, but a huge number of staff coming back, so people who've retired or who've left the NHS thinking that they want to come back and work with us and support our patients. So I'm incredibly grateful to them. We hope that some of those people who've returned will want to stay with us as well. So we're looking now to create different ways of working so that those members of staff who've come back and joined us can stay working with us. And that could be different ways, so digitally, remotely, working with their local practices in the case of primary care. But we really do thank them, and we really value the time that they've given us at a very challenging time.
Great, thank you. Chris, is there a follow-up you'd like to ask?
Just one last question. It seems like a long time ago now, but early March, the government announced a lot in the budget, a lot of support for Yorkshire and Bradford, devolution and a huge amount of funding. Obviously, a lot has changed since then. A lot of this funding was seen as vital to help areas like Bradford regenerate. With all that's changed, can there be any guarantee that all these projects, this funding devolution is still going to be there, or are places like Bradford back to the drawing board after this?
Well, thank you. That's a very important question to end this afternoon's press conference on. This government was elected on a platform of levelling up and uniting the whole country, and we have absolutely no intention of stalling those plans. And in fact, Unfortunately, some of those places that we were already focused on, already working with, are exactly the sorts of communities and economies that are likely to be most hit by the economic disruption that's going to come out of coronavirus. And so it is extremely important that we return with gusto to that agenda, and that's absolutely what we intend to do. We will continue to devolve power to local communities in Yorkshire. As you know, at the budget, we signed a fantastic new devolution deal for Leeds and its surrounding economy, and we want to do more for North Yorkshire, for the Humber, and indeed for other parts of the north of England as well. We'll return to our work on towns, ensuring that they get the funding that they need for technology, for education and skills and infrastructure. And that work will be more important than ever as we begin to rebuild and recover the economy and move forward with the life of the country. Thank you very much, Chris. Much appreciated. And that concludes this afternoon's press conference. Thank you very much indeed for joining us from Downing Street today.
Robert Jendrick, the Community Secretary there. Lots of questions, as you heard, from regional and local journalists, not least about the help the government has promised and what help the government has delivered to local councils. Robert Jendrick said councils were getting more money than they said they needed. On comparison for international death rates, he said the time for accurate international comparisons will come in future, although at this very news conference there were two graphs indicating comparisons for international death rates, and both of them indicated the United Kingdom was close to or was the worst in Europe when it comes to death rates. And on that topic, the new total today breached 30,000. 30,076 deaths in the UK with coronavirus, an increase of 649 on the day. A very important statistic, another one to tell you, is the number of tests carried out. 69,000, which Ben Kentish calculated is 43% down on last Thursday, the only day the government breached its 100,000 target. Worth also saying today that Boris Johnson, Prime Minister, set out an ambition for 200,000 tests by the end of the month, but that's testing capacity. Ben, what did you take from all of that?
I think that was the key thing. And again, not just the number of tests failing to meet the target, falling significantly since last Thursday, but falling again from yesterday. The last 2 days it's been around 85,000. Okay, it's still a long way short of 100,000, let alone the 122,000 that we saw last Thursday. This time down to 69. So a big dip. It was raised quite extensively at this morning's briefing with Number 10. They say they are still committed to keeping it 100,000 a day. And then, as you heard, Boris Johnson said that he wanted to expand it to 200,000 a day. But I was a bit surprised, I must say again, that for the third day in a row, nobody at the press conference asked about that. Because, of course, it's only been 2 days now of all the, since last Thursday and last Friday that the target was met, and since then it's fallen short. So I suspect there will be more pressure on ministers to get it back up and keep it balanced.
Quite. This trend carry on, the number of deaths will overtake the number of tests. Ian Dale with you at 7. Next, Nigel Farage.
Thank you, Eddie.